Thanks, Patrick. What are we telling consumers? Well, the buzzword sustainability, and it comes up in every conversation about harvest strategies, fisheries management, marine parks, and of course eco-labelling. But just before I start talking about eco-labelling, I'm going to abuse my privileged position of having your attention to bring to your notice something that's totally unsustainable, and that is the degradation of our coastal fisheries habitat. Nothing at all to do with eco-labelling, but I've got your attention, so I'm going to use it. An example is the fish kill on the Richmond River, and this happens when a slug of deoxygenated, low pH water moves down the river and it kills everything in its path. Apart from Ocean Watch, the environmental NGOs don't seem to care. New South Wales DPI is finally doing something about it, and I've got some pamphlets over there on this, and I'd encourage anyone that's interested in this to grab one of those. It's happened 4 times in the last decade just on the Richmond. It's happening now. It kills more fish than fishing. 80,000 dead fish counted one day, Thursday the 17th of January this year. We've got to fix it. Okay, let's get on to eco-labelling. The word on everybody's lips, as I said, is sustainability, and although there's a multitude of definitions of sustainability, there is no global standard. What is understood is that a naturally reproducing population can be regularly harvested sustainably, provided 2 things. 1, we don't threaten the population's long-term ability to reproduce, and 2, the ecosystem's ability to sustain itself. The fact is that good fisheries management aims to maximise sustainable yield, and that requires maintaining stock to a level considerably below the unfished stock level. Well-targeted depletion usually reduces competition for space and food among the remaining individuals, which can in turn result in increasing growth rates, earlier spawning, and higher larval and juvenile survival rates. Now, uninformed critics turn that on its head and make statements like stocks are heavily depleted, an undefined and unqualified emotive statement with negative overtones. There's also a multitude of self-appointed arbiters of sustainability. These are some. Robert Curtotti showed some others. There are about 30 in Australia at the moment. These seafood sustainability information schemes are generally either certification schemes such as MSC or the recommendation lists such as those published by Greenpeace and AMCS. They all promote their particular assessment criteria as being the right one. One of the problems is that these groups frequently don't agree on what is sustainable. Classic example is New Zealand hoki, certified as sustainable by the MSC, red listed by Greenpeace, and Coles recently promoted it as being sustainable. Who are consumers supposed to listen to? Greenpeace is on record as saying that no fully credible certification system for wild-caught seafood exists. Where do we go from there? Even aquaculture gets caned. This is what the AMCS is telling consumers. They go on to say that sea cage aquaculture adds pressure to our wild fisheries, uses fish meal made from wild fish. Yes, it does. In fact, our biggest fishery, Australian sardines, is fed to other fish. They can't seem to accept that it might be perfectly all right to convert sustainably harvested, otherwise valueless fish into highly valuable fish. I don't see anything wrong with that, provided it is sustainable. We've totally confused consumers. This report, published in Seafood International last year, demonstrates the problem. So a third of people aren't sure how to choose sustainable fish products. They're confused by the labelling. No wonder. Recent research in Australia by Walcott Research found that 46% of respondents agreed with the statement, "I don't put any faith in eco-labels from supermarkets." You haven't said a word, I mean it.
I'm holding it there.
These statements were made by Coles March last year. Every element of that statement is incorrect. The 500 tonnes a year of orange roughy that we harvest is certainly sustainable, even if the 50,000 tonnes per annum back in the 80s and 90s was not. So we're now harvesting at a level 1% of the level we harvested back in the 80s and 90s. And sure, that wasn't sustainable. But we now harvest from one place only, and it is, we'll come to that. So that's one statement that's incorrect. Australian oceans are certainly not being seriously overfished, and there is little chance of any favourite Australian seafood disappearing, certainly not through fishing. No marine species has ever been fished to extinction. Anywhere. Even the Australian Marine Conservation Foundation says that orange roughy is no longer subject to overfishing, but they still list it as say no. Coles recently added Victorian snapper to its red list. Now, I've seen tens of thousands of tonnes of fish go through Sydney Fish Market, and I've never seen a Victorian snapper. Last year we sold nearly 1,000 tonnes of snapper. Came from New Zealand, from South Australia and from New South Wales, all sustainably caught. But now consumers think that snapper is unsustainable. This is Coles' Sustainable Seafood List published a couple of weeks ago. The problem here is that by announcing that 17 species of fish are sustainable, the inference is that hundreds of other species are not sustainable, and that simply isn't true. By the way, they can't even get the Australian standard fish names right. I'll leave you to pick which ones are wrong. I won't leave you out, Amina. This was a statement from Woolworths, again, March last year. Now, the truth is that yellowfin tuna and orange roughy, there is no current pressure on these species. ABARES' assessment of orange roughy is that Cascade Plateau orange roughy remains assessed as not overfished and not subject to overfishing. It is the only place in Australia where orange roughy is targeted. In the eastern, southern and western zones, there is no targeted fishing for orange roughy, and the stock is assessed as overfished but not subject to overfishing, mainly because there isn't any fishing. You remember the so-called last tuna. The 2010 ABARES Fisheries Status Report assessment of yellowfin tuna stock in the Western and Central Pacific Ocean is that it is, quote, not overfished and not subject to overfishing. Last week we had Dr. Ray Hilborn out here, highly regarded marine scientist, and one of the slides that he showed that tuna in Australian waters is at about 80% of the unfished biomass. In other words, it should be fished harder to achieve maximum sustainable yield. It is certainly not under pressure. So it's obvious from this Australian Financial Review article that the media is also finding the issue difficult to grapple with. So that's the problem. What's a better approach? I don't think eco-labelling is the way to go. What we need is an Australian standard for sustainable fisheries management based on the UN FAO guidelines for responsible fisheries management. It's not radical thinking. Iceland's done it. And we're not picking on the various bodies like MSC and so on. Ray Ryuta, head of the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, because this has been raging over the last few weeks, told a state legislative committee last week, and I quote, "Regardless of what we think of the MSC and without necessarily criticising the MSC, the fishing industry simply cannot, as a matter of principle and form, tolerate a situation where a single private entity on the basis of a changeable private standard has sole authority to decide who can sell seafood to the public and who cannot." The FAO developed a voluntary code of conduct for responsible fisheries management. The code provides principles and standards applicable to the conservation, management and development of all fisheries. Australian fisheries have been noted as amongst the best managed in the world. Surely if we told consumers this and backed it up with an ISO standard for sustainability, consumers would no longer be lost in the murky water of eco-labelling and be able to enjoy great Australian seafood with a clear conscience. Thank you.